So hello, my name is Adam Smith and I'm the Programme Director at University College London, and I'm the chair of the iStart PIA to Elevate Early Career Researchers. And today we were actually supposed to do this as a podcast a couple of weeks ago, but we missed our slot. And we always think it's important to talk about conferences soon after they happen as we can. And we missed our opportunity to do that a week or so ago. But while this is still fresh in our memories, we wanted to talk about last week's AAIC Neuroscience Next conference. This is our first experiment with Twitter Spaces and our first endeavour into what they're coining as social audio. So we're just familiarizing ourselves with the functionality of this service, so do bear with us. However, we are very enthusiastic and hope you enjoy the format. Essentially, this should run a little bit like a live online podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by 4 brilliant early career researchers, one of whom was a co-lead organizer of the conference, and 3 of whom very much enjoyed the event. So we have Dr. Oz Ismail. Hi, Oz.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good, thanks. Is this working for you? Is this your first time on Twitter Spaces?
Yeah, I was using I ventured into Clubhouse for a while, and it was weird. Clubhouse, I found it a little bit weird, but I see that Twitter have basically, I don't know who came up with it first, but I was going to say they've appropriated the idea. But yeah, I'm sure this will work fine.
Much the same. We also have Sarah Gregory from the University of Edinburgh. Hi, Sarah.
Evening. Hello.
And we have Nan Fletcher-Lloyd from Imperial College from the UK DRI. Hi, Nan.
Hey, Adam. Nice to speak to you.
I know we've not actually spoken before, have we? This is our first time of speaking, although we've been corresponding.
Yeah.
And then we should also have Megan O'Hare, who some of you listen to our podcasts will be familiar with, who has just asked to join as a speaker. There we go. Hi, Megan. Megan will be rapidly unmuting herself.
Yeah, hi. I've unmuted myself. I'm just perched in our porch at the moment, trying to work out whether the house is too noisy with the children or the road is too noisy with the cars. So I'm just in the porch at the moment.
That's all right. It's not too chilly in there, though, I hope.
I'm wearing 2 jumpers and a cardigan and a scarf.
We're all in the UK, as you can probably tell from the cold weather. It's not quite so cold where you are, Oz. In fact, actually, Oz, why don't you go first and tell us about you and yourself and your work?
So I'm Oz Ismail. I am a postdoc at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon. So even though I'm from the UK, I am not based there right now. So I started my postdoc in February last year. And the lab I work in, the Mishra lab, we look at defects in neurovascular coupling and blood flow. So specifically, my project looks at what happens with blood flow changes after small strokes and how that contributes to dementia. And also in terms of the AAIC Neuroscience Next conference, I was the co-chair for the scientific program. So I helped put the program together along with a bunch of very brilliant people.
Fantastic. And we're going to ask you all about that in a little while, because I think in advance I did already have some questions sent through to us talking about how you get involved in being the organizer on a conference like that and what's involved. Why don't we come to you next, Sarah? Tell us about yourself and where you work.
Hi, everyone. I am a part-time PhD student and a research fellow at the University of Edinburgh. In my PhD work, I look at the role of stress as a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And my work is looking at diet and the risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. So they're kind of related in terms of they're both prevention questions. And for both, I use the PREVENT and EPAD cohorts that have been led from the University of Edinburgh and are either UK and Ireland-wide or European-wide cohort studies.
Great. And actually, while we're there, are those cohorts still growing then, or are they still growing, or are they still having new data added to them? How do they? And can people get them?
So the EPAD project, the IMI funded period has ended, but multiple follow-on projects are being planned in a lot of the European countries that are involved. So in Scotland, we're opening our pilot follow-on relatively soon, and that data will carry on going in, and it's a completely open data set. So anyone can apply for any of the EPAD data. You can apply for the samples, you can get the images. There's 2,092 people who did their baseline, and then varying numbers of people with follow-up. And then the Prevent project, so we finished the main part of the project, but we've got a specialist recruitment effort underway now to recruit people who have played rugby at a professional, or if it was not a professional sport at the time, who have played rugby to kind of a significant level for clubs or country, to understand kind of risks within that particular group. So we're still expanding that cohort. And again, it's a fully open access cohort. Anyone can apply for the data.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sarah. And Nan, why don't you go next?
Hey, so as Adam mentioned, I am a PhD student. I am in my third week of my PhD at the UK Dementia Research Institute Care Research and Technology Centre, which is at Imperial College London. And my work is focused on investigating the use of remote monitoring technologies to improve the provision of healthcare for people living with dementia.
Ooh, remote monitoring technology. So is this smart devices, or is it stuff in your home?
It can be in-home, smart devices. It all kind of comes under the umbrella term of remote monitoring technologies. Yeah.
Brilliant. Is that a ready-made project that was already defined when you come in, or have you got scope to influence the work?
It's kind of ready-made in terms of we're all in our group looking at the use of remote monitoring technologies, but I've definitely got scope in terms of what exactly I'm looking at, which is really cool.
Brilliant. So anybody who's interested in this should definitely give Nan a follow to see what transpires. And last but not least, of course, we've got Megan O'Hare. Megan.
Hi. I've opted to sit on the doormat in our porch to get more comfortable. So I used to work with Adam. I think my job title then was Research Associate. Now my job title is Freelance Science Communicator. Thank you for that, Adam.
I thought it was better than stay-at-home mum, which of course you're not.
Yeah, I have children. I've birthed them. I am a mum, but I also have a PhD. I joined Twitter yesterday, so that's it's really working out for me, this Twitter thing. Yeah, so I used to work with Adam. I've hosted quite a few of these podcasts, so I don't actually think I've interviewed any of you guys, but as Adam said, I'm sort of on maternity leave, so it was quite nice to watch a conference about science and remember science. So that was really nice from my point of view.
And we should add that as much as you've been away with family stuff, but of course you're going to come back and host some podcasts for us, aren't you? Particularly the heavier science ones, which are a bit over my head.
Yeah, that's the bit that I love. And if this was a video, I mean, I'm kind of glad it's not, because you see the porch, but I love science and I love talking about science, and my sister embroidered me a little sign that says science on it, and it's in our hallway, so I could have showed you that to show you just how much I love science.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everybody for joining us in this little experiment in social audio. So the format of these highlight shows is pretty simple, to be quite honest. We've done quite a few over the years covering AAIC and various conferences, but essentially what we do is we kind of go around the table and pick out our favorite talks, particularly for those that weren't able to attend, so that it gives you a chance to go back and maybe inspired to look at some of the ones you've missed, also look up the people that delivered those so you can find out more about them, or just to get some of the information that you couldn't get from the conference. But before we get to that, let's start by asking if anybody if any of our guests did you present anything yourself? Oz, I know you were a organizer and you chaired some sessions. Oh, it looks like Nan's holding up her hand. So Nan, 2 weeks into your PhD and you're already presenting. That's impressive.
I had a little bit of a head start. I did my master's research project with the lab group, so I was able to present some of my master's work as a poster, which, I was really honoured to be asked to do so.
Brilliant. So tell us about that.
So I was looking
pitch your poster.
Oh. I was looking at the home monitoring of daily living activities and predicting agitation risk in people living with dementia. So it was kind of two different studies in one, still focused on remote monitoring technologies. And I think one of the really interesting things actually was being able to look at legacy data of our patients. So we were able to sort of get an insight into how the COVID-19 pandemic and quarantines in the UK anyway had affected the people in our cohort. So that was really kind of fascinating to learn about, but also useful in terms of what we might be able to do in regards to providing more improved, more appropriate, more patient-specific healthcare. So, I can go into details of my poster.
Well, no. So tell me which you, because we use this kind of generic catch-all term for remote monitoring. So are we talking about CCTV in the corner of the room, or are we talking about, telephone calls and telemedicine? What technologies did you use for this poster?
So there's no CCTV in our case. We were looking at the use of passive infrared sensors. So really, those are sort of just small sensors positioned in different locations in the household. It could be different rooms, but it can also be kitchen appliances. And we also have a bed mat sensor, which detects bed activity. So not sleep. At the moment, I didn't look at sleep anyway, but we did look at sort of resting data.
What does that? How do those sensors, infrared sensors, tell you if you're agitated? Megan's got a question too. What was your question, Megan?
Oh, well, mine was one of the presenters in the next decade of omics, I think her name's Nilofer, talked about like the potential for essentially using that sort of technology as a marker or a biomarker. So you basically, she gave an example of an 80-year-old woman. The GP looked at her stats, and basically her wearable technology was saying that she was moving in a less stable way. So it was like a really early marker of potential cognitive decline. And I wondered if you can use your sort of data to track back through people and pinpoint various stages in the disease.
Yeah,
that's so go on.
That's basically
2 questions in one.
That's kind of it. Well, that's half answered your question, Adam. Thank you, Megan. So we look at activity and changes in activity. So the sensors, they kind of have we look at them as on or off. So if they are activated, then we kind of have a reading. So we can visualize patterns from that data. And if there is a change in the pattern of behavior, in the pattern of resting in bed, in the pattern of how many times someone might be going to the bathroom, especially in the nighttime, that could all be very indicative of agitation. So it very much helps and can be used as a biomarker for agitation risk.
Fascinating. And what were your conclusions on that poster?
Conclusions. So for one study, we saw something really interesting actually from looking at COVID-19 quarantine, which is that female and male patients seem to swap over their duration resting in bed at nighttime, which we seemed sort of, from other studies that we'd read up on, it looked like women, and especially women with underlying health conditions, and over the age of 60 seemed to be sleeping poorer during the quarantine. And okay, we couldn't say about sleeping, but resting wise, that seemed to sort of support that. So that was something that was really fascinating to see. And yes, the other study was about modeling agitation risk. And it looks like looking at the thermoregulatory system of patients and also how patients can adapt to changes in ambient temperature is really, really important with regards to agitation.
Oh, this is fascinating. You can see so much potential for this in the future. I get the feeling that we're literally just at the start of exploring the potential for this work. Is there any other, just last question before we move on, are there any other kind of diseases or that are ahead of us in using this kind of technology? Is dementia kind of leading the way?
I think dementia could be leading the way on this, to be honest. I think there have been sort of some diseases here, there, where wearable technologies might have sort of come into play. I think there have been some wearable technologies with cancer patients, but I think this is a really big movement and it's being done with dementia.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for picking up, and congratulations on presenting a poster so early on as well. And of course, the UK Dementia Research Institute has a whole separate arm looking at use of technology and artificial intelligence and lots of things. And I did see that there were some jobs advertised there just this last week. Yeah, and they'll be on our website, dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk. If you're looking for a job, there's all the listings there. Yeah. Is that to work with you now?
I'm not quite sure it's to work with me, but it's to work with my wonderful lab group, and they really are an amazing group.
Fantastic. Right, let's get into it. Sarah, I'm going to come to you first to share what were your best bits from Neuroscience Next?
So I picked a couple which were looking at quite different topics. I firstly really like the variety of the conference. There was kind of so much going on, but there was definitely something for everyone, and a really good mix of like the poster sessions and the lightning presentations, and then the career sessions, which I think you might talk about a bit later. So the first one that I have highlighted in my notes was by someone called Matthew Kang from the Royal Melbourne Hospital, and he was presenting on neurofilament light, but looking at it in an audit, which I thought was really interesting. So his question was, could neurofilament light be used in a neuropsychiatry service? This was a service for young onset dementia cases, and they had a huge time lag between their presentation and their diagnosis. So I think he said it was 1,241 days. So possibly not surprising given how complex those cases are to diagnose, and so many of the participants, or I guess patients, because it was an audit, came to them with a psychiatric diagnosis. They were kind of getting, in many cases, this misdiagnosis beforehand. And they were getting clinical lumbar punctures done at their baseline. But from my understanding, it was more to look at kind of A, beta and tau, but they also happened to get neurofilament light from the spinal fluid. So they had 131 patients, mean age of 53, so you can see it is a young onset dementia. And like I said, 66% of them had this psychiatric diagnosis prior to attending. When they kind of then followed them up, 86 were given a neurodegenerative disorder diagnosis, and 45 had an other, so maybe a functional disorder or something else kind of going on that the clinicians weren't sure of. And then an additional follow-up, 22 of those patients had a diagnosis change. And what was interesting is 77% of those diagnostic changes from this other group to a neurodegenerative disorder, or the other way, were actually predicted by the baseline neurofilament light. And that was all done by kind of blinded investigators who predicted what the neurofilament light would have in the diagnostic category. So he kind of described it really nicely with a case study where a participant ended up with like a frontotemporal diagnosis with a really complex background, and actually the neurofilament light would have changed their diagnostic path. So I thought that was a really nice use of something that we typically only use in research settings currently, showing that it has the potential to make a massive difference, particularly in that patient group where diagnosis is really complex and the neuropsychiatric symptoms that you get in kind of young onset dementias just make it a really difficult diagnosis to give to someone. So yeah, that was really, really interesting.
Well, and every time we see these, I swear I haven't been to an AAIC conference in the last couple of years that hasn't demonstrated that the application of better biomarkers than those which are being routinely used in healthcare, nearly every time have a significant percentage of people have a changed diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it shows that it's worth, doing a lumbar puncture is an invasive procedure, but actually if you've already got your tau and A-beta, which is putting you down kind of one thought of where your diagnosis is going. If your neurofilament light's also adding on this certainty about diagnosis, it makes it so much more worthwhile asking your patients to go through that process.
Yeah, definitely. So what else did you say? What I haven't quite figured out yet, unless anybody has, is how we take questions from people. And I'm afraid to press any buttons just in case it closes down the conversation. But bear with me. I'm going to, while you tell us about your next bit, I'm going to see if I can figure this out to invite people to ask questions if they've got them. So what else did you see, Sarah?
So the next one I highlighted was from the Hospital Clinic of Barcelona, presented by someone called Adria Tortmerno, and they were presenting on kind of an augmented virtual reality game. So it was something called the Altoida IADL, and they were trialing it for the diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. So it's like a 10-minute cognitive test, but to look at the activities of daily living. And like I said, in this augmented reality, so it's a series of hand movements that you had to make. So placing and finding virtual objects in a real environment. And the score that the researchers or eventually the clinicians would get out of it is a neuromotor index. So it's looking at things like micro movements of hands, walking time. So that all comes together to give a measure of cognition that has a bit more of a real world applicability. So it's a relatively small sample they were looking at this in. They had 51 participants, and they included people who had mild cognitive impairment, prodromal Alzheimer's disease, and mild Alzheimer's disease. So they had 22 MCI, 15 prodromal AD, and 14 mild Alzheimer's dementia patients. And they found that the task, the Altoida IADL, could differentiate between mild cognitive impairment and the prodromal or mild Alzheimer's disease dementia cases. But the prodromal and mild Alzheimer's disease cases, there was no difference in their scores. And the neuromotor index score, which was the score you get out of this task, correlated well with the MMSE, which is obviously a very basic, broad brushstroke cognitive tests. And also, they also looked at neurofilament light in the spinal fluid, and again, it correlated well with that. So again, there was like a really nice theme of technology. I saw Nan's talk as well, which was great, and there was a really nice theme of kind of how technology is developing in so many different ways, and this was a great example of something that just had a bit more of that real world utility about the cognitive test, and actually seem to have kind of an application in this pilot study. So I think that would be a really interesting one to follow and see as they move to larger studies, does it still maintain that kind of discriminatory value between the different diagnostic groups?
Yeah, I can see that, and brilliant. Was there anything else that you particularly picked up on?
So the only other thing that I was going to talk about really was not necessarily a session, but just kind of an opportunity that for this conference in the future for other early career researchers. So I applied to be an abstract reviewer. And that was a really great experience, having submitted to a lot of conferences and not really knowing what happens between you putting your abstract in and then getting your decision. It was so good to be able to kind of see that behind the scenes. So there was training in a webinar from Claire Sexton from the Alzheimer's Association and lots of documents in the review portal as well. And we got a small number of abstracts. I did actually get assigned my own one, but I was honest and said, I can't score this. It's excellent, I can't score it. And then rated it, and then it came back to your organising committee, I guess, with other ratings, and then that helped you guys choose the kind of programme. I just thought it was really interesting to actually, as an early career researcher, see how that process works, and really get what abstracts were clearly communicating, even if it wasn't something that you knew so much about, and which ones that you could see it's good science, it's a good abstract, but it's not as clear as kind of the best ones. And I think that was really, really helpful because you only ever see yours and maybe a couple of your colleagues' abstracts. So yeah, just kind of a pitch that if there's other early career researchers, I just thought it was such a good opportunity to get to kind of have a go at that side of the conference.
And I've never come across this before, because if people apply for grants or jobs, there's an increasing kind of expectation that you'll get feedback if you get rejected, particularly. I wonder, I mean, I suppose, do people get feedback? Did anybody's poster actually get rejected? And if they did, would they get feedback? Or comments from reviewers generally, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that would be a really interesting point. I suppose, like, the big conferences get so many. I know the rejections, kind of when we're going through the training, the rejections really are for commercial science that shouldn't really sit there. And I think it's quite rare for things to be outright rejected, but if there is ever any opportunity, I think it's sometimes nice to know what could have changed in your abstract to get it to be an oral presentation rather than a poster, if you had put in for that category where you say, I would like oral or poster.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Maybe just that distinction, because I agree. I don't think the only times you see abstracts really getting rejected are if they're put forward just for the completely wrong conference. You know, if they're put forward for a clinical conference and you put forward your one about some biology topic or something like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sarah. That was fascinating. And of course, for anybody who's only just joining us or who missed AAIC Neuroscience next conference, the platform's still available for I think at least another couple of weeks. And if you don't have access to it, but you particularly want to see some of the presentations or the posters that are mentioned in this chat today, drop me a line and we can always have a chat with the organizer, who also, one of which happens to be in the call today, and we can see if we can get that shared with you in the interests of open access and science. Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm going to come to Nan next. Actually, no, Megan. Let's come to you next.
Hi.
We talked to Nan for ages about her research. She's had so much airtime. No, I'm teasing. Come on, Megan. Tell us what your highlights were.
I watched the next decade of omics, and I really enjoyed that session. I think all of them. I like the idea of having a junior researcher, ECR, introduce the session and give a talk and host the questions and answers. I think that's a really nice idea. I feel a bit like I haven't seen many conferences in the last year because I've been breastfeeding, so maybe I don't know if that's now a common thing, but anyway, I thought that was nice. So in the omics one, Nadia Dighani gave a really nice overview of what's been happening in the last few decades and then where we can maybe see the future of omics used. This would be like genomics, proteomics, transcriptomics, epigenetiomics and metabolomics. And then Vivek Swarup and Nilofer Ertekin-Tainer, my handwriting is bad, talked a bit more about it. And it was sort of struck me as like this, before it would be a bit, there were very elegant experiments, but it was a bit like, let's look at a brain. We've got a disease in the brain. We'll mash up the brain and we'll look at protein. But what they're talking about now is using single cell analysis, or at least single nuclei in the brain analysis. And just the amount of information you could get from that, proteins going up, phosphorylation, all this stuff, from really honing in on the specific area you want to look at. Because obviously with Alzheimer's disease, it follows quite a stereotypical, different regions of the brain are affected at different times. So looking at a whole brain approach won't necessarily give you the answers that you want. So being able to actually zoom in and say, right, I'm really interested in this specific cell population and what is happening in that cell population that is not happening in that one that's literally next door to it. Why are they more vulnerable? And then looking at what genes are expressed, how they're expressed, what levels of expression you have, and then the ultimate protein, and then what's happening to those proteins. It's sort of how you imagine science would be. You'd be like, yeah, of course, you'll just pick a tiny bit of the brain and really analyze that. And it feels like the science is catching up with that now, and it just seems like amazing. So
you're sounding a lot like somebody that wants to be back in the lab, Megan. Never mind science, freelance and science communicator. You want to put that white coat on, don't you?
Yeah, basically. And also my son just keeps telling everyone at school I'm a scientist. I'm like, oh, that's sweet. I haven't been in the lab for a long time. But what I really want to push is, I feel like there should definitely be portfolio working, where I can work in the lab for 2.5 days and then communicate the rest of the time. But often all jobs are like full time. Anyway, that's a side point.
So if you've got a job somewhere near Sussex or in London right now for somebody who wants to get back into lab work, Megan's in the market.
Yeah, send me your CVs instead of having to send out mine.
Part-time particularly.
Yeah. And then the other session I watched was Women in Autophagy, which I used to work in autophagy and I am woman, so that was nice. And they have a research network, and I joined it because I was like, oh, that's so great, like our one. It's like just such a nice thing to do, to give a space to this group of people. And so they were able to publicize their network, and then I don't know how many joiners they got, but I joined. And then they did this lightning round thing, which I think Sarah mentioned. And I really like that idea. You just do a 10-minute presentation, and then you get some questions back, and then people can come and find you later. So it's almost like a post on steroids, but not quite a talk. So I don't know, it seemed like, and it was accessible more to early career researchers. So it gave you a little platform to boost up your poster views, and also then people could come and find you virtually and talk to you more. I just really like that idea. And the two people who talked were Saskia Pollock at King's, and then Marina Garcia Macchia, who then talked about the disease that I did my PhD on, Batten disease, which gets no exposure because it's so rare. And then she even talked about the tiny gene that I worked on, CLN7. So that was just a lovely experience for me personally.
And I think you made a really good point right at the start, which is early career researchers are really at the heart of this conference, aren't they? Oz, maybe I can bring you in if hopefully you haven't dropped off to sleep.
No, I'm still here.
Why is it so important that early career researchers are at the center of this conference?
Yeah, I'm glad I'm hearing these themes, because this conference was first born out of like the need for this conference last year, when at the height of the global pandemic, the biggest neuroscience conference, Society of Neuroscience, decided that they were unable to run the conference, which meant that a lot of early career researchers, people who had just either started their PhDs, their postdocs, or were just becoming assistant professors or establishing their labs, suddenly didn't have the opportunity to network with the biggest group or the biggest community of neuroscientists. And so the association got together and thought, well, why don't we provide this opportunity virtually by putting on this neuroscience conference that is specifically for those people who became early career researchers during what was a very difficult time. So this conference that we had this year was actually the second one of Neuroscience Next. And we continued that theme where we said we saw that there was a real need for a space that was specifically tailored to not just early career researchers, but to also showcase how global neuroscience is and how diverse neuroscience is. And so we had that in mind when we went into this at the beginning of this year's conference organization. And we really, really wanted to put the early career researchers front and center because, these are the people who are going to be then establishing labs in the next 5-10 years. These are the people who are going to be forming those breakthrough hypotheses in the next 5-10 years. And so that's one reason why it's important. The other reason it's important, I think this comes from a very personal place as well, is to kind of change the way in which we communicate science. So, for instance, the lightning round presentations, that's something we did start last year and carried on onto this year because, we want people to become or to be able to talk about their science in very small segments, but also communicate what they're trying to do very effectively in a way that in a way that attracts interest into that field, And so that's why the lightning round presentations we think work really well, because people are forced to kind of get to the point of what they're doing very quickly. And so then it then stimulates a lot of conversation because all the extra bits that we tend to put into our talks, which is like background information or methods, which for the most part aren't really necessary in a talk. You really want to get to the meat of it. And these lightning round presentations really make people do that. And, people are getting so good at doing that. And we love seeing that people are doing more and more of that. So yeah, I think that was kind of another thing. Like the communication aspect of it was another theme that we were thinking about when we were putting this conference together. Yeah,
and you got a feeling that
keep talking about
no. And you get a feeling like it's a safe space, right? I mean, so of course, as much as most of the content comes from early career researchers, of course, anybody can attend and come and watch and listen. But am I right in thinking that like all the talks were from? All the talks were from early career researchers?
All the for the most part, the lightning round talks were all from early career researchers. I think the most senior people would have been like assistant professors, so they're also still pretty early. For the featured topics that we had, so the omics, the sleep, and those invited speakers, they were professors and more senior people. And the reason for that was also because we wanted the majority of our audience to be people who were just starting out in this field, to also get exposure to what was going on, what is, what's new and what's hot in neuroscience and dementia research. So we had some of those big name talks as well. But in terms of showcasing current research, that was all what early career researchers are doing right now. Yes.
And being free, it makes a massive difference for opening up access to this as well, doesn't it? I mean, I know AAIC, I think, have been amazing of Alzheimer's Association over the last, since the pandemic started, in very altruistically opening up conferences where many others are still charging, even if they've reduced the fees they charge. To be able to make this free and open access as well is amazing, particularly if you're a neuroscientist in a less wealthy country or without that kind of big budget. But it doesn't even matter if you're in a wealthy country. I know neuroscientists in this country who can't get money to attend conferences, and I'm in the UK. So well done.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that was also another important reason why it was important to carry on doing the Neuroscience Next conference, even though the main AAIC conference this summer did go ahead, was because this was kind of a satellite conference to provide opportunities to people who either couldn't travel for either budgetary reasons or because of the pandemic. and or because of family circumstances, because people's family circumstances have become extremely challenging over the last year, no matter where you are. And in that sense, like being more accessible, I guess, it still required you to have access to a computer and internet connection, but just opening up that level of access was once again really important as to why we want to do this conference again. Yeah.
I agree, and it's found its own niche. I don't think this in any way at all is kind of competing, or people who go, "Oh, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to, it's AAIC or Neuroscience Next." I think it's found its own niche. I think the only thing I'd say is it could be maybe a little bit more in the middle, It comes quite soon after the AAIC, so I could see how if you just presented at AAIC, you might not be quite ready to present again quite so soon.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah, that's a
earlier.
good point. So when we were picking the dates for it, we were like, so last year when we launched it, so last year I was in the organizing committee, and this year I was the co-chair. And both times when we were talking about where to put it, we were conscious last year that the SFN conference wasn't happening, so it was very easy to just plonk a neuroscience conference in that slot because there was an appetite for it already.
Yeah.
This year, seeing that there was like a very good reason to do it and a need for it, we even talked about whether we push it as far as January. But no matter where in the calendar you look, it's going to clash with something that's big in research and in neuroscience. So
yeah,
the association then, based on their events teams, they're so plugged into research events, and they advised us that this was the best kind of window.
and they do so many other. I mean, we shouldn't just that they also have so many other satellite symposium. I mean, straight away they've got is the Tau conference starting this week, or is that just gone? They had another thing last week.
Yeah, they had so the APOE and Immunity conference I think it's finishing today, and yeah, they have like a whole bunch of satellite conferences that they do, and also it's not just the research conferences; they also have like community events that they do, which also conference very much like a conference, and they're just scattered throughout the calendar. So we just worked with the association and the advice that the events team gave us.
So let's stick with you for a little while, Oz, just to get into the answer this question that I mentioned we had earlier, which is can you talk us through the process of, so for anybody who's listening who's not been involved in the organising committee of a conference like this before, how does it come about? Generally, what's involved? How did you pull it off?
Well, most credit goes to the association and a wonderful team of people who are so good at doing this. And also in terms of the scientific program, I was very lucky to work with some really, really brilliant early career researchers and very, very brilliant senior people in the field. So the way, just to break it down, the way it works is the association. The first year we ran it, the association worked with people in their network who they knew had worked in other events. So the way I got plugged in was I had worked as a student volunteer at a couple of their conferences. I helped them launch their Meet the Author Journal Club. So I had done a few things with their professional network, which is called iStart. And they called upon some of the other senior people who worked in their other scientific committees, a bunch of early career researchers who had worked through their iStart initiatives, and put this committee together. And then following the end of the conference last year, Claire Sexton from the association put a call out, I think through social media, asking if anybody who had come to the conference was interested in joining the committee to basically get in touch with her. And she did the same call this year as well. So essentially what we want is to hear from the audience. Like, so if people came to the conference and said, actually, I would do this a bit differently in this way, or I really like this and I want to be part of this specific thing, the association do want to hear from you, and they want to know like what new ideas you can bring or how you can even build on the existing ideas. So I would say just like reach out to these people, network with people either through social media or through the conference platforms. So yeah, once you get involved, once you get called upon to become a committee member, we broadly have, a kickoff call where we talk about what we think, what everyone's ideas are, what we think we want to bring into this conference. We break it up into specific subgroups. So this year we had skills, which focused on careers and communications. We had another subgroup that worked on the scientific program. We had another subgroup working on the what would be the lightning round presentations, and we had another subgroup working on what awards we were going to give. And from there on, those subcommittees kind of work kind of independently, along with assistance from Claire from the association. And then every, I would say every couple of months, the whole committee would come together on Zoom, and we'd put forward the ideas and what we had shaped as what we wanted to have in our specific slots. And then the association and the events team work to then kind of beat it into a beautiful program.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So I should say that I sat on the organising committee in my capacity because I chair one. Anybody who's listening, for those who are here, I chair the iStart PIA for early career researchers, and so in that capacity, I sat on the one that was the little subcommittee that was looking at careers, and I think we probably met maybe once a month for about 3 months. I think we met about 3 times generally. Initially to introduce ourselves to each other, then to talk in a high level kind of what we wanted to deliver as a career program in this. Then we got a little bit more into the detail of suggesting speakers and how we might break the sessions down, and then shared out some of the jobs in chairing and assigning people. And then once, for me, maybe this is just because I'm detail oriented, but once I knew which session I was going to be chairing, I'd arranged to speak to the 2 speakers to make sure we got the most out of it. But it was a brilliant experience, and I think you everybody said this, Oz. You did an amazing job. It's been such a fantastic conference, and I think anybody who's listening who's not been involved before, I think if this call comes around next year, by all means, I think volunteer. You'll get a lot out of it.
Absolutely.
Apart from anything, making connections as well, right? Also, you meet people through this.
Absolutely. That's the part where you do meet people and you make some really good connections. In fact, you get to meet some of because it's not just all early career researchers. That we do have a bunch of senior the professors on the committee as well, and you get to meet some of these names that you see them do plenary talks, or you just see them at conferences, or you read their papers. You get to meet them like one-on-one when you join these committees and subcommittees and get to really know them. The other thing I would say is really I found really valuable, and I'm really grateful that the association put so much trust in early career researchers to kind of lead this, is you can bring your own, what is important to you. You can put that at the forefront of what you're doing. So as co-chair this year, I really wanted to make sure that we had a very diverse and global program. And I also wanted to make sure that, communication, good science communication was also featured as well. And also that we were kind of spotlighting people who are not just doing, the best of the best science, and not just doing, publishing in Nature and Science and all those high impact journals, but also recognizing the work that they were doing behind the scenes to make science so fantastic. So yeah. I worked with Claire on, one of the things we did was to revamp the poster template. So I really enjoyed going to the poster halls because I was really glad that a lot of people used the poster template that we revamped, and essentially was done in a way to kind of bring your key messages front and center, to put like a big figure or schematic at the middle of your poster so that it was going to attract people to come and see your poster. And a lot of people use that, and so I was really glad to see that happen. And also, we kind of created a lot of award categories in order to recognize some really good work people were doing in terms of mentoring and in terms of like diversifying science a bit more, and really doing some important work behind the scenes that doesn't always get recognition through like the traditional routes of science. So we had some brilliant winners of the mentoring awards and some really, really deserving winners who won the One to Watch awards as well.
Let's briefly talk about that. So there were a couple of awards, weren't there? There was the one. So first of all, there was the Excellence in Neuroscience Mentoring Award, and these I thought the way that this was done was awesome. So Melise Edwards and Ionis. Can you pronounce her surname? Oz. Sotiropoulos.
I can't remember Ionis' surname, but yeah, I know who you're talking about.
So they won the 2 awards, and I thought it was brilliant that they didn't give their acceptance speeches till you'd heard from not just one person that had said that they were a good mentor, but like 2 or 3 people that had said they'd been their mentors and helped. They were so passionate. I mean, there were people in tears during those talks. They were a brilliant and such deserving winners.
Yeah, so that was really important to just personally, for me, it was important to show like the human side of it, and so I was really glad that was something that the association and the committee put together, because you don't often see the kind of personal side of science celebrated, and you don't often see the people who are really championing early career researchers being celebrated or being given praise or even awards for doing, because it's kind of seen as their job. And I think while it is everybody's job to be good mentors, there are people who really in science go above and beyond, and there are people in science who really can be really terrible. So we can't just like call them all mentors and say they're all the same. So it was really nice to see, like, for instance, Ioannis's team members just getting so emotional about how much he allows them to be themselves and to thrive in the lab and in science, you know. And the same with Melise, like her students, like how much work she personally does to put into these students to make sure that they kind of get their place in science, particularly because she works with underrepresented people. Yeah, those were my favorite. The awards categories and the sessions were definitely my favorite sessions of this conference.
And brilliant to recognize that mentors come from all different places, and that a mentor isn't necessarily just your supervisor. You know, that in the case of Melise, particularly the people who spoke about how helpful she'd been, these weren't, you know, I mean, am I right in thinking Melise is a PhD student herself, or she just finished?
I believe she is still doing a PhD. And
still doing a PhD.
I believe so. I could be wrong in that, but I know that she's very, very early in her scientific career, and that's what I mean. Like, this is extra work. So she created her own mentorship scheme. That is extra work that she is doing that people don't recognize, because it doesn't fall into your day job, for example. You know, and I think recognizing that this is a lot of skill, a lot of effort, a lot of emotional energy that goes into these initiatives, particularly when you're trying to diversify science and make science more equitable. That's not necessarily still recognized in science as like part of what you're paid to do, you know?
Absolutely. And I think also as well, what's really great about that is if anybody's listening now and thinking, I'm an early career researcher, I'm not qualified to be somebody's mentor because I don't have enough experience myself, I definitely suggest you have a think about that, because you will have, you know, even if you're only in the second year of your PhD, you will have gone through a year of experiences, or, you know, different things in life which could help somebody else. So I think if you get opportunities to put yourself forward to be a mentor, don't just assume because you're an ECR you're only qualified to be a mentee rather than a mentor, because I think you might find you can help people. Melise is an award winner for this Neuroscience Mentoring Award. It is the living embodiment of how that works.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think just like remember that there are people, you know, as you progress through your career, you are every step forward you take, you have gained more knowledge and you gain more skills and you've gained more opportunities. Think about how you're going to transfer and share and pass on those skills and opportunities, and how you're going to pull people up with you. I think that's what a good mentor does, is they look who is following them and pull them up to their level with them, rather than keep them in a hierarchy.
Definitely. And if anybody's looking for a mentor, Oz is available.
I'm always available to help people, definitely.
Hey, Megan, you'd be a good mentor as well, having come out. You've got life experience, lab experience. I think you could you'd be good at that.
I'd love to do that. I started I called it a friend-making group when I was doing my PhD, but we decided to call it like PhD and postdoc group, so that we got together and chatted, and then we did quizzes with people to help collaborate with other groups in other centres in King's at Guy's campus, but we were on the 4th floor and we never really talked to people on the 3rd floor, so we created this group so that we could meet other people, and
that's a great idea.
Yeah, it was good. And then we got some external speakers in to come and give science talks, so that our department would give us some funding to do it. But ultimately it was about meeting other PhD students, getting a beer and doing a quiz and getting to meet other people. I'd love to be a mentor.
So there you go. Anybody else listening, get in touch with Megan. And if anybody, actually, if you're not a member of our iStart Peers PIA and you missed this, last month for our annual scientific meeting, we had Penny Moyle from Race Against Dementia and Dan Sims from Hintster Performance Coaching give a talk about mentoring and performance coaching in science. And that was really brilliant. If you missed it, it'll be available on the iStart YouTube channel, I guess, or the iStart catch-up video channel. It should be available soon, if not already. And that was really great. And Dan actually coaches Formula One drivers on attitude and things like that. And he did get a great talk about how that can be translated into science. So plug for that. So then there were also some other awards. Oz, there was the one to watch, and then the ones for the presentations.
Yeah, so we had the ones to watch award that we launched this year, and those awards were, again, specifically to look outside just scientific brilliance, because we know that at every conference and every big organization every year will give out big awards to people for doing really great science. So what we thought about within the committee was, how can we recognize the things that happen that are brilliant outside of just the lab work itself, outside of just the good scientific thinking. And so that was a more kind of loosely worded award, because we wanted to see what the nominees were being nominated for, everything from improving access to science to again, mentoring was also one of the categories in there, to being more inclusive in science, and also sort of all kinds of nominations came in as to why people were deserving of this. And so it was a very, very difficult category to work with, because everybody who got nominated was deserving of it. So we really looked at we looked at it from a diverse angle, in terms of like who is doing, not only doing good science, but also contributing to the culture of science being positive. Because talk to a lot of early career researchers, and they will tell you that going through a master's, PhD, postdoc is a very, very hard experience. Sometimes made even harder because of the culture of certain labs or certain organizations. And so we wanted to see who was actually changing that as well. And so we had 4 winners for this. We had Angeline, who was the co-founder of Black in Neuro, who launched the Black in Neuro group at the height of the social justice movement that was sparked by the murder of George Floyd last summer. We had Eduardo from Brazil, who's been mentoring some really, really fantastic scientists in Brazil, despite the fact that their funding has been cut by over 90%, I think he said. He's still producing some really excellent early career researchers who are finding international success. We had Victor, who now is no longer in the lab, but has done some really, really great work in mentoring underrepresented scientists and getting more people into science. Um, and then we had Ron, who is a high school student who basically has his own almost patented invention to help dementia sufferers. So
Do you know what?
we had
Can you tell me about Ron? So I missed that. I joined this session late, and I didn't quite cotton on to that he was as young as he was. So what was it he'd done? I missed that bit.
So he's come up with a way to use. I think essentially come up with a software that uses handwriting as basically, by the sounds of it, a biomarker to detect for early detection of dementia. He presented this work at AAIC in the summer as well, so that he said that was his first scientific conference. And now he's actually applied for a patent for the work that he's done. And he's in high school. I guess he'll be going to uni in the next year or so.
Wow.
And that's great, because that's another thing we wanted to really recognize these very, very up and coming early scientists who are doing work towards changing the field of dementia. And it was wonderful to be able to recognize a high school student in amongst all these other scientists.
Definitely, and really inspirational. I know from our work on the Careers Week and things back in March that we're going to do again next year, trying to encourage undergraduates and even younger people to have a kind of, a passion for science. And then if we can lure them into dementia, all the better.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think,
keep
and
them.
also it's nice to see that, like, because these are people who their interest starts so early. You know that they are going to follow through with that if they're like starting to make inventions already. How do we make sure that they follow through with that? That's by support organizations like the association continuing to show that there is support for people who are doing this kind of science, and so we need to retain people like this in the scientific pipeline.
And if you're listening and like Ron, you've got an idea for an invention, the Alzheimer Society have a grant call which is open right now. The deadline is the 31st of October, which is called their Innovation Accelerator Programme, which is providing up to £100,000 in funds. Or if you're elsewhere in the world, you can apply if you're in the US, but you need a UK collaborator. And this is to fund anybody at all, a designer, a technology person, a coder, anybody who's got a good idea for a service or product that will genuinely help people with dementia. And it doesn't even have to be a fully formed idea. Even if you've just got it, they'll provide input from people with dementia, business support, accounts support, design work, and up to £100,000. So just a bit of a plug for Alzheimer Society there. Thank you very much, Oz. Before we move on and come back to Nan, last of all, were there any particular talks that you wanted to flag that you enjoyed? Did you get a chance? I assume you got a chance to see some. I know you were so busy chairing and hosting and organising.
Yeah, so it was on those 2 days it was running. It was a little bit nuts from my end, even though I was like, sitting in my apartment. Drinking a lot of coffee, but because there were a lot of sound checks and stuff like that happening for every session. But I did manage to catch some of the sessions, and the talk that really stood out for me was the sleep session, and I really, really, really enjoyed Dr. Gina Poe's talk, because basically, first of all, she is a brilliant speaker, so engaging and so wonderful to listen to. And on top of that, she basically gave an overview of basically sleep science and also sleep across different species and different animals and stuff like that. And I really thought that she had nailed the brief for this conference because it was an overview talk. It was very understandable to any level because we had opened this to, high schoolers, undergraduates, anybody who wanted to come. And so it was the kind of talk that would really attract you into this field. And there were some really fascinating facts that we don't normally come across, like the fact that whales sleep vertically when they're in their sleep cycle. There's a phase of sleep where they're vertical in the water. That blew my mind. And there were like so many little facts like that I really enjoyed in her talk.
Oh, that's interesting. The idea that I wonder how that impacts the brain if you were to sleep standing upright, or in an upright bed. Like astronauts kind of float around in space. I'm just saying astronauts because I've just seen Nicholas has dropped into the room, and he and I have been talking about doing a podcast on space science.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think because conferences like this can be quite like so thick with science, sometimes the speakers can start pitching the talk at such a high level that you're kind of doing a disservice to the more junior people in the room. So if someone is from high school or undergraduate, or even just starting their PhD, if you're pitching it at such a high technical level, you're going to miss those people. And Gina Poe did such a brilliant talk in which she just like made it so interesting and so understandable that most people in the room would have got it and been really interested. I mean, I have done very little, if not no, research in sleep, and I was like, this is a cool field to be in.
Yeah. And that's, do you think that this is one of the great things? I'm a little bit disappointed actually in the last 2 years that I thought conferences moving online would encourage this shift that we've been talking about for quite some time, that different people working on different areas would have the opportunity to overlap, that we'd get some cancer researchers or cardiovascular disease researchers or people working in different zoology would start to come to our conferences, and we would go to theirs to cross-fertilize fields and ideas. And I mean, you did it really well in encouraging with that talk, but we haven't seen as much of that as I kind of hoped. But AAIC have definitely tried, because back in July they had that great talk from the lady whose name escapes me, who came and gave the COVID talk. I don't know if you saw
Absolutely.
that one.
Yeah. She gave one of the plenary talks at the main conference, and again, I think that's something that hopefully we will see change. I mean, that is one of the things we had in mind when we launched AAIC Neuroscience Next last year, is that even though it's falling under the brand of the Alzheimer's Association, we wanted it to become a neuroscience conference, so that it was going to inspire new ideas by different people, even within neuroscience. Neuroscience is so huge, like different people across different subfields of neuroscience talking to each other, engaging with each other to create new ideas on how to solve, neurological disease.
And it is interesting. I hosted one of the poster social conversations, and one of the people there, it was quite interesting. One of the people in that room knew nothing at all about dementia. They weren't a dementia researcher, but because this was a neuroscience conference, they'd put forward a neuroscience poster, and they were there to present on a different field of neuroscience. So actually, maybe I'm being a little bit unfair in saying there wasn't that overlap. I think maybe there was more overlap than I thought. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Oz. And I agree with you. The sleep session was awesome. If anybody's not caught up yet, definitely go to the AAIC platform and catch up on the sleep session. And Oz, of course, is there on Twitter. He tweets loads of interesting stuff and has a great podcast of his own, and does so much fantastic work. So be sure to give him a follow, and give Megan a follow as well, given she's brand new to Twitter. And Sarah and Nan as well. So Nan, let's come to you last of all. Sorry for keeping you waiting.
That's all right. I've been enjoying listening to, everyone else talking about things that I didn't quite fully grasp. So
and we haven't suddenly stolen your limelight. That we actually, I hate being last, because being last is good because you can hear what everybody else says, and it always makes you feel comfortable. But equally, if somebody just stole all the things you were going to say, then you sit at the end and go, yeah, what he said.
Don't worry, I made a list just in case that happened.
Good. So what did you enjoy this conference?
So particularly as I'm so early on in my career, I really focused on attending as many of the career development sessions as I could. And I think there are a couple that sort of were really, really fascinating. But I think my highlight of the career development sessions has to be the communicating your research to diverse audiences.
No, that's the wrong answer. Because I chaired a session during their careers. You're supposed to say the one about cold emails.
That's okay, because I chaired the one that Nan's talking about. So it's great.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh, go on then. Tell us all about it. And Ozzy's there to check your memory.
Well, I did write everyone's name down. So this was with Sophie Milbourne, Raven Baxter, Courtney Kloss, and Chan and Farhad Khan, who I'm now following on Instagram and Twitter because they gave me lots of good ideas. So it was a really good way for me to actually find people to network with post-conference. But it was really interesting to me because I've just started my own blog, Disabled Queer and a Woman in STEM, or DQW in STEM on Twitter. And I think the kind of sort of things that they were sharing, it went from general tips on the sort of who are you trying to approach or communicate your science with? How are you going to do that? Are you going to use social media? Are you going to use newspaper, TV? And sort of what is your research? Why is it important? Why is it interesting? To sort of tips that were more specific, I think, to creators and people interested in SciComm, sort of how to really communicate with your audience and let them know that you really care about what they try to do with you. So it was really, really interesting. Some good tips.
So Annie Chan, I'm a big fan of, and she was one of the people that presented she is a vlogger. If anybody's not seen her, if you go to our YouTube channel, Dementia Researcher, and look at the people we follow, she's one of the people that we follow, and she does these videos that she posts every week, which are essentially presenting this kind of genuine fun. I mean, I swear to God, I don't think she ever has a bad day. She's the most upbeat, on it, happy person I've ever come across in science. She really is, yeah. And she does these, I mean, and I don't know where she gets the ideas from because they're great. I saw her do a video a couple of weeks ago on, like, what does she have in her handbag? What should every scientist have in their handbag at any one time, and like what do her colleagues think about her, and what's she doing, and what's her morning routine? These are real insights into her life that kind of, I think if you're thinking about a career in science, it paints a very, very honest picture of what it's like, which I think I've listened to so many early career researchers over the years who have this kind of picture in their head as to what a scientist is and does, and are so disappointed when they end up being a scientist in real life and find that it's not at all like they expected. I don't know. What about you? Does that stand for you, Oz? Is it what you expected when you were, young?
I mean, I think I had like a really weird route into my scientific career, and so none of what I did was what I expected it to be, because I was always like juggling other jobs alongside being at uni or doing my PhD and stuff like that. So I honestly didn't know if anything I was doing was normal when I was doing the PhD. And then I thought, well, once I start my postdoc, that's where I'm going to be like on a sort of level playing field with other postdocs or the postdoc experience. But of course, as soon as I started my postdoc, the pandemic started and I just moved to another country. So even my postdoc experience is nothing like what a postdoc experience should be.
No.
So yeah, I think what I'm learning is there isn't a universal experience, really.
And Sarah, you had a similar experience, because I knew you before you even started your PhD, that you came into this later, having already worked in research before in the same way.
Yeah, I've done lots of things before finding the PhD, and then doing it part-time, having that job alongside gives you kind of a different perspective than initially when I started. I used to have people going, oh, you're doing a part-time PhD, that's weird. And now a lot more people are doing it that I've met But I also meet a lot of full-timers who are like, oh, I kind of wish I was doing it part-time like you. I'm like, yeah, it's a good way to do it.
Yeah. But so anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Nan, but if you haven't watched Annie's YouTube channel, go follow it. And as dementia researcher, if you think you could do what Annie does as that kind of on it science vlogger, we're interested in finding somebody to work with us who's going to do what she does, but do it with us at Dementia Researcher. So if you think you can do that, drop me a line, and I don't know, send me a reel. I don't know. Send me an audition. Make a video. Show me what you can do, and we might hire you as our staff vlogger. What else did you see now?
So my other highlight, sorry, Adam, sorry, this is not yours.
Another one that's not mine. I'm going to tell you what, I don't care. I'm going to talk about mine at the end.
Yeah, see, you can talk about your own thing, so I've got to talk about everyone else's. So this was the education and employment section, which was realistic resumes. And it was really just a sort of discussion where you get to know different people in different areas of academia, industry, see how they got there. And I think the best part of it was actually, and I think we all need to hear this sometimes, that everything I am definitely feeling right now at the start of my PhD, and I'm sure we've all felt at some time, the insecurities, the imposter syndrome has been something that everyone has felt and continues to feel. So it was really, really good just to sort of hear that you weren't alone in that situation, I suppose. But they were also really good at highlighting the sort of difference between a career in industry and a career in academia. So I'm still kind of wondering which direction to go in, especially at the end of my PhD, which is a long way off still. But it was really helpful to sort of understand the differences and motivations behind the research, the different opportunities you might get in that work. So it was really good.
Well, actually, you might find, so we're recording a podcast next Wednesday, which we've got Yvonne Couch, who was in the chat a little earlier. I saw her listening in. Yvonne Couch, who's an AAIC fellow from Oxford. We're going to do a 3-part podcast special. So this is with 4 postdocs who all feel that they're rather stuck, if you like. They've got to the postdoc stage, they've got to a senior fellowship stage, and are feeling a bit stuck. And we're breaking it down into 3 separate discussions. One about what you could potentially do earlier on in your career that helps you avoid pitfalls in the future of getting stuck. And then another one about if you're already in that position, what you can do about it. And then a third one about what culturally needs to change generally to improve the kind of career flow for a researcher. So that might be of interest, particularly the first one about what you can do early on to avoid getting stuck later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks.
That's okay. So, of course, well done for spotting on the career sessions. There were quite a few career sessions, which are all brilliant. Selena Ray and Christina Dang chaired one on that was a session on, God, I forget what it was. I remember the takeaway though was there was an interesting point at the end about they had them talk through their CVs about whether it still really is necessary to move countries, and I think it had an interesting point at the end, which it really seems to possibly depend on where you start. Like if your career starts in India and you want a senior position, it definitely helps if you've had some time studying in the US, for example. But if you start in the UK or if you start in the US, it's less of a necessity that you've had some time overseas. You can progress quite well. But if you start in some countries, it helps. So that was a really interesting session. They had Anusha Mishra and Zeshan Ahmed, who works in industry, talk to that one. I'm going to talk about this. I did chair a session with with Beth Eyre, who's a second-year PhD student, just starting her first year from Sheffield. She did an amazing job in interviewing Fernanda de Felice, and I interviewed Eric Dine, and we looked at something we all have to do at some point, which is to send a cold email to people who you might want to give you a job or to look at your CV and things like that. And the takeaway messages were that your cold emails needed to be concise, have clear and actionable request. You need to avoid being self-indulgent, explain why you chose to send the email to them, make it okay to say no, and ask if they could recommend somebody else if they couldn't help. I remember that because I also wrote a blog on that, which you can find on the Dementia Researcher website. I think that's all we've got time for. I've taken up so much of everybody's time, but this has been brilliant. So what do we think about social audio generally? Go on, all turn your microphones on. What do we think? Does this format work? We've seem to have a lot of people who dropped in and out, and some have been here the whole time. Well done, Emery and Anna, who've been with us the whole time. Am I allowed to see your name? Everybody else can see you're in, so it's not outing you. Are these your fans? Are these your friends? Have you got your sisters to come and join?
Oh, Emery is my very, very good friend. We did our masters together.
What about you, Oz? What do you think? We could use this again, couldn't we?
Yeah, I think it's like a good platform to just have, general chats and stuff like that. So yeah,
just
it was
informal,
a nice little experiment.
Bit of engagement.
Yeah.
And thank you, Megan. Not only first time on this, but first day on Twitter.
Yeah, it's gone well, I think, for my first day on Twitter. And quite a few emojis. People with less emoji trigger happy. I enjoy to send as many as possible.
Well, I wanted to see, because when I've joined these before, what you see is you see the speakers, but above that, you usually see tweets. And I can't, I'm interested if anybody's watching, whether you can see the tweets that Dementia Researcher has recently done in a line along the top, because all I can see is a block of who the speakers are and where they, who's watching and who's contributing. So I'm not sure what you can see. If you're watching this at home, Emery, take a screen grab and DM it to us as to what you can see while we're having this chat. That would be helpful because there's very little instructions online. Right. Anyway, I think that's all we've got time for today. I'm going to whip back to my script to follow up. Thank you so much to Dr. Oz Ismail, Sarah Gregory, Nan Fletcher-Lloyd, and Dr. Megan O'Hare. Calvert O'Hare, is it nowadays?
Just O'Hare will do.
Megan O'Hare for joining us, who you will hear back in a podcast soon. In fact, Oz is going to be doing some podcasts for us soon as well. And hopefully we'll talk Sarah and Nan into writing some blogs for us. So if you attended the conference and you missed any of the talks we've been discussing today, you can still seek them out. Go and watch them on Catch Up. And take a look on Twitter with the hashtag AAIC Neuro. And you'll be able to see some of the tweets and speakers and posters. If you couldn't catch a poster that we've talked about, or you don't have access and you particularly want access to something, drop us a line and we can work out a way of getting that to you. It's time to end today's discussion, but before we do, I just wanted to remind everyone to consider joining iStart. You'll find details on als.org. There are tons of benefits which include free entrances to conferences, discount to the AAIC, and of course the chance to join in professional interest areas, which includes our own PIA to elevate early career researchers, and a reminder that we're running our international career survey right now, which you can do at dementiaresearcher.nihr.ac.uk/survey. It does take about 20 minutes to do. It closes the 31st of October. But we're going to use those results to kind of inform the guidance and potentially what might get included in conferences in the future. And very, very last of all, I just wanted to let you know about a very special podcast mini-series we're releasing every day next week called Methods Matter with Leah Fulliger as part of the National Centre for Research Methods Festival, which will be releasing a great new show each day covering qualitative interviews, social network analysis, qualitative longitudinal methods, multi-level modelling and secondary analysis. So don't miss that. And thank you very much again to our awesome guests, all of whom have profiles on our website, which includes details of their Twitter accounts and all the information on what they work on. And thanks very much, everybody. And
thanks for having me.
We'll do this again.
Thanks, Adam.
Bye.
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 Bye.